Ma'am, I need you to step off HOA common property right now. Those were the first words out of Deputy Eli Mercer's mouth at 7:12 a.m., standing at the edge of Natalie Walsh's gravel driveway, with wet dark patches climbing his boots from sprinkler runoff, red and blue lights strobing over her mailbox, porch rail, and the little cedar library box she had bolted into the corner of her front yard 6 months earlier. Karen Langford stood just behind him in a wide-brimmed visor and oversized sunglasses, pearls fixed neatly at her throat. A clipboard clutched flat to her chest like a shield she had been waiting all week to raise in public. Natalie did not stand. She sat in her cedar rocker with a plain white mug balanced in one hand, robe-tied, work jeans under it, one heel tucked against the porch rung, as if this was a weather report she had heard before. The sprinklers from the Willow Pine Shores entry island hissed 2 lots down and clicked off in rotation. Somewhere past the fence, a garage door groaned open, then stopped halfway. Someone in the neighborhood clearly deciding this scene was worth watching in silence. Karen took one sharp step forward and pointed at the library box. That structure is unauthorized, non-conforming, and a public nuisance. She has been notified. Repeatedly, that frontage is under HOA control. Her lipstick was too bright for morning, and her voice was pitched to carry over the cruiser engine and through every nearby window. She's trespassing and refusing lawful directives. Deputy Mercer glanced from Karen's clipboard to Natalie's porch and back again, confusion written plain on a young face trying hard to look official. "Ma'am, do you have ID on you?" he asked Natalie, careful with his tone, not aggressive, just procedural. "I need to verify who's supposed to be on this parcel while we sort out the complaint." Natalie lifted her mug, took a sip, and set it back on the porch arm. "I'm Natalie Walsh," she said. "I live here." Her voice stayed level, not slow in a dramatic way, just steady and worn in like a tool that had done real work. "And this is my yard." Karen snapped her clipboard open. Plastic sheet protectors flashed in the cruiser lights. "Deputy, she keeps saying that as if saying it makes it true. We have board minutes. We have violation notices. We have legal correspondence. This lot corner was designated as shared streetscape under HOA Beautification Authority. She put up this box without architectural review and invited non-residents onto private community land." The deputy turned the papers in his hands, without pretending he fully understood them. "Mrs. Langford, I hear you," he said, "but I still need to confirm county records before I ask anyone to leave their own property." Karen's jaw tightened. "I am the HOA president. We already did that." Natalie rocked once, lightly, cedar slats creaking. She watched a robin land on the top of the library box and hop off again as Karen kept talking. "Deputy, she is obstructing planned community use this morning. We have volunteers coming in 45 minutes to reset this corner for a residents-only event. This has gone on long enough." "Volunteers for what?" Mercer asked. Karen gave him a look that suggested he should have known. "A board-sponsored brunch setup. Tables, floral stands, welcome arch. We're restoring standards." Natalie finally looked directly at Karen. "On my frontage." Karen did not miss a beat. "On HOA-controlled frontage." 2 more patrol units rolled slowly past the stop sign at the entrance and idled without lights. A quiet signal that dispatch had marked this as a neighborhood property dispute and wanted witnesses, not force. A curtain twitched across the street. A man in a suit jacket held a travel mug beside his truck and pretended he was checking his tire while he watched. Deputy Mercer shifted his weight. "Ms. Walsh, would you be willing to step down here while we talk through boundaries?" She shook her head once. "I'm fine where I am." "Ma'am, I'm trying to de-escalate." "I am de-escalated." She touched the side of her mug with one finger, then folded her hand in her lap. You can run the parcel ID off the marker by the fence post. White stake, black cap, county stamped. Karen let out a short laugh meant for the audience gathering behind blinds. See? This is exactly what she does. She talks in circles and stalls. We have sent a cease and desist through council. She ignored it. We fined her $100 a week. She ignored that too. We documented unsafe gatherings, people loitering, children from outside the development crossing traffic to use this box. She turned my neighborhood entrance into a public park. Natalie's eyes stayed on the deputy. Kids trading books at a library box is not a public safety emergency. Karen's face flushed tomato red under the visor brim. It is when it violates governing documents. Mercer scrubbed a hand over his jaw, trying to keep both parties in lane. Mrs. Langford, did anyone from the city issue a violation? This is an HOA matter. So no city citation? Karen tapped the clipboard twice with manicured nails. We are empowered by covenant. Natalie looked at him with quiet patience. Deputy, you can call county permitting. Ask for archived plat and frontage registration on Willow Pine Shores Phase 1 and 2. Ask who holds this corner. Ask who holds the emergency egress strip behind that hedge while you're at it. That made Karen turn fast enough for her heel to sink in damp turf by the walkway. She yanked it free and pointed her pen like a dagger. Do not let her derail this. She has been hostile to board authority from day one. She records volunteers. She refuses design compliance. She will not submit forms like everyone else. Natalie gave a small nod. I did submit forms, just not to you. The sentence landed harder than it sounded. Mercer caught it, looked at her again, and this time he listened with the attention of someone sensing there was an entire file cabinet missing from the version he had been handed at dispatch. Karen heard it too, and for the first time, her words came a half-second late, scrambling to recover the center of the scene. Deputy, she cannot weaponize bureaucracy against the board, Karen said. This community has standards. If one person ignores them, the whole neighborhood declines. Property values drop. We become one of those places. Natalie almost smiled, but didn't. One of those places with books? A bark of laughter escaped from somewhere behind the azaleas across the street, quickly stifled. Karen stiffened and turned her shoulders so the pearls sat square again. This is not funny. No, ma'am, Mercer said. He looked at Natalie. Ms. Walsh, are you refusing a lawful order to move from this spot? She met his eyes. I'm declining an unlawful one. The young deputy held that for a second, then nodded once, tiny, like a man setting down one box before lifting another. All right. Nobody is under arrest. Everybody stays put while I verify records. Karen stepped toward him, lowering her voice, but not enough. You're making a mistake. She's counting on delay. We have workers en route to remove that structure. Natalie spoke over the rim of her mug. If anyone touches that box, make sure your body cams are running. Mercer looked sharply at her. Why? Because documentation matters, she said. The siren lights had stopped by then, replaced by quiet, idling engines and the thin buzz of cicadas waking up in the heat already building over Willow Pine Shores. The morning smelled like wet grass, fresh coffee, and the chemical tang of new asphalt from the subdivision road behind her fence. Karen stood rigid with her clipboard, still performing certainty for every unseen watcher. Natalie kept rocking, small and even, cedar whispering against cedar, not giving 1 inch of panic to the theater in her driveway. She knew exactly how loud this looked, and exactly how it would read later in writing. She had spent enough years in county offices to know that the first person to shout ownership usually had the thinnest stack of proof. Karen had come armed with laminated rules and bold assumptions. Natalie had come armed with coffee, patience, and memory. When Deputy Mercer stepped away to radio records, Karen leaned toward the porch and hissed, "You brought this on yourself." Natalie answered without heat, "No, you brought deputies to my house because children borrowed books." Karen drew herself up again, preparing another speech for the growing, invisible crowd. But Natalie set her mug down and finally spoke the line she had been holding since the cruiser turned in. "Now hold up," she said, looking past Karen to the street, to the houses that had risen where open pasture used to roll. "Let me take you back. Because what happened next shook this whole subdivision to its roots." She did not raise her voice when she said it. She did not need to. The sentence landed in that driveway like a fence post driven straight and true, and for a brief second even Karen went quiet, as if she had heard a tone she did not recognize. Deputy Mercer was still 10 steps away with his shoulder mic in hand, waiting on records, and the 2 other patrol units idled near the stop sign like patient tractors at the edge of a field. Natalie sat in the rocker and watched sunlight creep across the gravel, knowing exactly how this scene looked from behind those curtains and truck windshields, knowing exactly which details would matter once the shouting burned off and people had to read what was written down. Karen broke first. "This is what she does," she announced to no one and everyone at once. "Deflects, monologues. We have a simple compliance issue and she turns it into theater." Natalie turned her head just enough to meet Karen's sunglasses. "No," she said. "You turned a little library into a patrol call." Karen pressed her lips thin. "You are not in charge here." Natalie looked back toward the street, where a boy on a bike had stopped at the corner and put one sneaker down on the curb to watch. "That depends on what you mean by here." That line sat there, plain as lumber. Deputy Mercer glanced over at her again, this time with that same puzzled focus he had worn when she told him to run the parcel marker. She could see the gears turning in him, and she respected that. Young or not, he was trying to separate volume from facts, which was more than she could say for the woman with the pearls and the clipboard. The morning went on, doing morning things, while the argument stalled. A mockingbird started up on a light pole. Sprinkler runoff found a shallow groove in the driveway and kept threading downhill in a silver line. Somewhere farther down Willow Pine Shores Drive, somebody opened a back door and the smell of bacon drifted out before the door shut again. Ordinary life had not stopped. And that, more than anything, steadied Natalie. She had learned a long time ago that chaos always wanted an audience. But records wanted dates, stamps, and square corners. If someone had asked her right then whether she was afraid, she would have answered honestly. Not of Karen, not of the patrol cars, not of a crowd. What she felt was something more complicated and more useful. A tight, practical awareness that this was the exact point where a story either got hijacked by noise or anchored to truth. She had spent enough years in exam tents, emergency bays, and permit counters to know that people in panic talked fast and forgot what they said. Paper did not forget. She lifted her mug, took a sip, and set it down again. "Deputy," she called, not loud, just clear. "When records comes back, ask them to include historical lot carve-out and frontage easement notes. Not just current tax parcel owner. The old file matters." Mercer nodded once. "Copy that." Karen gave a short laugh that held no humor. Listen to her coaching law enforcement. This is exactly the problem. She thinks because she worked for the county she can ignore community rules. Natalie rocked once, slow. "I think words mean what they say." "Rules mean what the board says they mean?" Karen snapped. That line told on her. Natalie did not answer it, because she did not need to. Karen had just declared, in front of deputies and neighbors, the same operating principle she had been using for months. Policy as personality, authority as performance. Natalie had seen that before in other uniforms, other offices, other years. It never ended well. She let the silence stretch and then, still looking at the street, spoke in the same steady cadence she had used with frightened patients and angry applicants and grieving families. You all can keep watching if you want. This is about more than one box of books. It's about who gets to rewrite boundaries because they bought a visor and a golf cart. A curtain moved again across the street. The man with the travel mug stopped pretending to inspect his tire. And then, right there on that porch, with Karen fuming and patrol engines purring and sun climbing the eaves, Natalie mentally stepped backward into the beginning of it. Because beginnings mattered. Not the beginning Karen told in board meetings, where she cast herself as steward of order. The real beginning, measured in years, in hands, in losses, in filings, in cedar dust, in coffee rings on old plans, in one woman deciding she could do one useful thing on a hard morning and keep doing it. She was 51 years old that spring. In town records, she was Natalie Ruth Walsh, Permit Technician 2, Development Services, 5 years in the seat and 12 before that, in field support and intake. On old Army paperwork, she was Specialist Walsh, Combat Medic, quick with a pressure dressing and calm under noise. On tax rolls, she was the owner of Lot A3 and attached frontage strip, 1.8 acres that did not look like much from the street, but held a whole life if you knew where to look. And in her own private accounting, the one no office ever asked for. She was her grandmother's girl, still trying to care for a piece of ground the way she had been taught. Her parents died in a winter highway pileup when she was 9. There had been black ice, 3 semis, and one county report that used the word chain reaction like it explained anything. After that, her grandmother June took her in without speeches. June Walsh was not an emotional woman in the public way. She was practical, stubborn, and kind in the kind of ways that built muscle memory. Boots by the door at night so mornings ran smooth, soup portioned in jars, forms signed on time, every bill paid before due date, even when money was thin. She taught Natalie that land was never just dirt and resale value. Land was where you buried a dog, planted tomatoes, fixed a gate, sat with someone after bad news, and kept showing up. The house itself had started as a 2-room cedar structure in 1968, added on to twice, patched through storms, painted and repainted as years allowed. June and her husband had poured the first slab by hand with borrowed forms. Later, when Natalie came back from her second deployment, she replaced rotten porch boards, sistered a failing joist, and rebuilt the south rail with treated lumber she hauled herself in a rented trailer. She did not outsource what she could do with a level, a drill, and patience. By the second week of May, 6 months before the first HOA letter appeared, she had sanded the rocker she was sitting in now and sealed it with marine varnish because Owen liked sitting there at dusk and she wanted it to last. Owen. Even thinking his name altered the air in her chest. Though 3 years had passed, he had been a mechanic with quiet hands and a dry sense of humor, the kind of man who read instruction manuals for pleasure and never left a tool in the rain. Pancreatic cancer took him in 11 months. That sentence was cleaner than the reality had been, but clean language was sometimes the only way to carry grief without dropping it. During those months, he read on the porch between appointments, Western paperbacks, and river memoirs, and thick biographies. He swore he was going to finish. After he died, Natalie found she could still sit in the same place if she had a book in her lap. Like the posture itself was a bridge. The little library started there, not as activism, not as a challenge, just as one practical act that made mornings bearable. She drew the first measurements on the back of an old parts invoice from Owen's shop. 24 inches wide, so chapter books fit flat. Pitched roof with drip edge, so summer storms would sheet off instead of pooling. Plexiglass door with magnetic catch and a simple latch little hands could manage. She chose cedar because she had scraps from the porch rebuild, then bought one fresh board for the trim so the face looked finished. She sank the post 30 inches, set it in concrete, and waited a full day before mounting the box. When she stocked it the first time, she used books she already had. Children's picture books from June's church drives, large print westerns for older neighbors, 2 grief memoirs she wished someone had handed her earlier, and a dog-eared field guide Owen used to keep in his truck. No ribbon cutting, no speech. She just put a hand-painted sign inside the door that said, "Take one, leave one, keep reading," and went back to work. For a while, that was all it was. Kids on scooters stopping after school. A retired lineman swapping Louis L'Amour for a birding guide. A night shift nurse dropping off paperbacks at 6:15 a.m. and waving through a yawn. Natalie would come home from the county office, change out of her badge lanyard, and find 1 or 2 books moved around. Sometimes a thank you note on receipt paper tucked on the shelf. Little signs of circulation, little proof that neighbors could share a thing without turning it into a fight. Then the pasture behind her back fence sold. And Willow Pine Shores rose fast, house by house, identical roof lines marching up the grade where cattle had stood for years flicking flies with their tails. The first months were mostly dust and nail guns. Then came sod rolls, mailbox standards, and at last the golf cart patrols. Karen Langford introduced herself on a bright Saturday in late September, rolling up in a white cart with a laminated HOA badge hanging from the windshield and a smile too practiced to trust. Pearls, visor, clipboard, the full uniform. "Just doing welcomes," Karen had said, stepping onto Natalie's gravel without asking. "We're aligning aesthetics for visual harmony at the entrance corridor." Natalie had wiped her hands on a shop rag and leaned on the porch rail. "Morning." Karen's smile tightened when she saw the library box. "Oh, that's cute. We'll need to discuss approved paint palette and design conformity." "It's on my lot," Natalie said. Karen tapped the clipboard with one manicured nail. "This frontage affects the whole community image." Natalie had nodded like she was hearing weather, not threat. "I hear you." She did hear her. She heard more than Karen intended. She heard a person testing whether she could rename what already existed and charge a fee for the privilege. She heard confidence built on assumption. She heard, under the polished language, a woman who had never pulled the archived plat, never checked jurisdictional notes, never bothered asking who had been here first. Karen drove off that day, certain she had opened a file she could close whenever she pleased. Natalie watched the golf cart bounce over the curb cut and disappear behind fresh magnolias, then went inside, washed sawdust from her hands, and wrote down the date, the time, and the exact phrasing in a spiral notebook she kept by the phone. She did that because she was dramatic, Karen would later claim. She did it because she was difficult, others would whisper. The truth was simpler. Natalie documented things because she had learned, in medicine and in government and in grief, that memory bends, but ink does not. She closed the spiral notebook, slid it into the same kitchen drawer where she kept spare batteries and takeout menus, and stood for a moment with her palm flat on the wood, as if she were sealing a document. The house was quiet, except for the refrigerator hum and the soft tick of the wall clock June had bought at a feed store 20 years earlier. On top of the fridge sat 2 photographs in mismatched frames, one of June in a denim shirt holding a string of bluegill at Mirror Creek, the other of Owen on this very porch, with a paperback open on his knee and his reading glasses slid halfway down his nose. Karen's voice still rang in Natalie's ears, polished and sharp and certain. But inside that kitchen, certainty belonged to older things. She walked to the sink, ran cool water over her wrists, and looked out the back window toward the fence line, where pasture grass had once rolled uninterrupted to the tree break. In the reflection, she caught her own face, tired around the eyes, steady at the mouth. And for a second, she saw all her years layered there at once. 9 years old in borrowed church shoes after the funeral. 21 in an army hallway that smelled like bleach and coffee, learning how to hold pressure on a wound while speaking in a voice that did not tremble. 48 on a folding chair beside Owen's hospital bed, reading chapter 1 of a Western neither of them finished. The property held those versions of her and the way cedar holds scent, long after the saw is put away. The memory that came first was not dramatic. It was June at the kitchen table on a cold January morning, sliding a ceramic bowl of oatmeal over and saying, "Eat while it's hot, baby." Natalie had been 9 and raw with a grief too large to name, waking every dawn for weeks, certain she had heard her mother in the hallway. June did not offer speeches about healing. She offered routine. Boots lined by the door, school forms signed, laundry folded warm. "You can cry," June had said one night while buttoning Natalie into an old flannel coat. "But you still put your shoes on. Both things can be true." Natalie carried that line into adulthood like a field dressing in her pocket. Years later, when June's hip started to fail and she needed a rail by the back steps, Natalie installed it on a Saturday in August. June sat on a lawn chair in the shade with a glass of tea and gave commentary she insisted was helpful. "Level looks off," she said, squinting one eye. Natalie laughed and adjusted it by a hair. "There," June said. "Now it'll outlive both of us." She was right about the rail. She was wrong about the timeline. June died in her sleep the following spring, peaceful and stubborn to the end, having left a neat envelope in the desk labeled "property papers." Read this first in block letters that looked carved with a chisel. That envelope had held the first deed copy, tax maps, and a short note in June's plain style. "If you keep this place, keep it useful. Don't let anybody talk you out of what's yours because they talk loud." Natalie had sat on the floor with those pages around her, sunlight crawling across the linoleum, and cried hard enough to give herself a headache. Then she had stood up, made coffee, and called the county to transfer records. Grief and paperwork, both things true. Owen understood that instinct without needing it, explained. He met Natalie when she was 29 and changing a flat in a grocery store parking lot, lug nuts fused tight, rain hitting sideways. He had crouched 2 spaces over working on an old truck and asked, "You want a breaker bar?" She handed him the wrench instead. "I want leverage." He grinned, and that was that. They built a life in practical increments. Weekend breakfasts, shared bills, quiet jokes, second-hand furniture repaired instead of replaced. When June got sick, Owen drove every specialist trip and never once made it feel like a burden. When June died, he stood beside Natalie at the fence line under a hard blue sky and said, "We can keep this place the way she meant it." He said we, and he meant it as labor. The year of Owen's diagnosis began with back pain he blamed on lifting transmissions. By April, he was thinner. By May, there were scans and waiting rooms and words that turned the world narrow. Pancreatic, aggressive, limited options. The oncologist spoke kindly, hands folded on the desk, while Natalie listened the way medics listen when seconds matter. Not for comfort, for facts. Afterward, in the hospital parking lot that smelled like hot asphalt and crepe myrtle, Owen leaned against the truck and stared at nothing for a long minute. I wanted more ordinary years, he said finally. Natalie took his hand. Then we spend what we have on ordinary things. So they did. He read on the porch between appointments. She cooked simple meals he could tolerate, marked meds on index cards, and learned the timing of fatigue like weather patterns. On good evenings, he sat in the cedar rocker and read aloud passages he liked, his voice roughening by sentence 3 and recovering by sentence 5. On hard days, he slept with a quilt over his knees while cicadas sang through the screen. One dusk in late October, sky copper over the fence line, he tapped the arm of the rocker and said, "When I'm gone, don't let this porch turn into a shrine." Natalie looked at him over her mug. "What then?" He smiled, tired but certain. "Make it a place people use." After he died, that instruction became scaffolding. The first month she functioned on habits and alarms. The second month she started reading again, 10 pages at a time. Mostly because silence in the house pressed too hard if she didn't. The third month she built the little library box from cedar scraps and Owen's leftover hardware, drilling pilot holes while a storm gathered over the pines. She mounted it at the yard corner where kids cut across toward the bus stop, brushed sawdust from the roof, and stood back to check the lines the way June had taught her. Useful. Not decorative, not performative. Useful. She stocked it in layers that mapped her life without announcing it. Picture books with bent spines from church drives June used to run. Large print westerns Owen liked because he could read them on low-energy days without squinting. Grief memoirs she wished she had found earlier, with underlined passages she hoped might catch someone else at the right moment. A slim first aid handbook tucked on the bottom shelf out of reflex. On the inside door, she taped a small card. Take one, leave one, no worries either way. By the third week, books started moving faster than she could track. Somebody left lemon candies in a jar for kids. Somebody else tucked a handwritten note behind a mystery novel. "Thank you for this. My mom used to read here too." 3 days after Karen's first visit, Natalie came home from the county office and found a cream-colored envelope tucked under the library latch. The paper was heavy, the kind boards used when they wanted routine business to look official. Inside was a courtesy advisement from Willow Pine Shores HOA, requesting a friendly coordination meeting regarding entrance corridor harmonization. The wording was all velvet and no teeth. No fines, no threats, just phrases like alignment, partnership, shared values. Natalie set it on the kitchen table beside June's old clock and read it twice. Not because it was unclear, but because she recognized the strategy. Start soft, establish premise, rename your ground as shared concern. She went to the meeting anyway. It was held at the newly finished clubhouse on the other side of the second gate, a low stucco building that still smelled like paint and carpet glue. Ceiling fans turned lazily over folding chairs. A tray of store-bought cookies sat untouched beside a stack of sign-in sheets. Karen greeted residents near the front with the same practiced warmth she had worn on Natalie's driveway. Visor replaced by a smooth blowout and pearl earrings that caught the overhead light. "So glad you came," she said as Natalie walked in. "We're building community." The first 20 minutes were harmless enough. Landscaping schedule, pool hours, reminder about trash bins. A couple with twins asked about speed bumps near the park, and Karen answered in a tone of patient governance. Then she clicked to a slide labeled Entrance Aesthetic Cohesion and put up a photo of Natalie's library box framed in a red digital outline. "This is the item we need to discuss," Karen said. "It's charming, but not compliant with design standards for gateway presentation." Natalie sat in the back row, hands folded, expression neutral. "That photo is my yard." Karen smiled without looking at her. It is in the visual impact zone. A man near the aisle raised his hand. Isn't that outside HOA lots? Karen adjusted her notes. The board has beautification authority for frontage experience. Another resident, older woman in a denim vest, asked, "Does that include telling people what they can put on private land?" Karen answered with polished confidence, "We're not telling, we're collaborating." The room stayed polite, but Natalie felt the current shift under the words. Collaboration that began with a red outline was still control. After the meeting, Karen intercepted Natalie by the coffee urn. "I hope you understand we're trying to avoid formal action," she said quietly, as if offering a favor. "If you repaint to approved palette and submit an architectural variance, we can probably resolve this smoothly." Natalie stirred powdered creamer into a paper cup she did not plan to drink. "I'm not in your architectural review jurisdiction." Karen's smile thinned by 1 degree. "Jurisdiction can be interpreted in edge cases." "Not by preference," Natalie said. Karen lowered her voice further. "You seem very attached to that box." Natalie met her eyes. "I am." For a beat, Karen looked almost curious. Then the expression closed and management returned. "We all have attachments," she said. "That's why standards matter." By the first week of October, more letters arrived, each one a shade less friendly than the last, while still dressed in procedural language. Requests became notices. Notices became demands for response within 10 business days. Natalie answered once in writing, attached parcel printouts, and cited the pre-HOA lot status without flourish. She sent it certified and kept the receipt taped into her spiral notebook. She still stocked the library every Sunday evening, wiping the shelves, rotating titles, and replacing warped paperbacks after rain. Kids kept coming. So did grandparents, dog walkers, and a city bus driver who swapped thrillers before dawn shifts. The betrayal did not arrive as one dramatic act. It came in increments, each small enough for outsiders to dismiss, each clear enough for Natalie to log. A volunteer she did not know peeled off a hand-labeled public library sticker and replaced it with Residence Exchange. 2 board members measured the box with a tape and photographed her porch without knocking. Maintenance workers trimmed her hedge 2 feet past the property line and claimed confusion. Every time, Karen framed it as housekeeping. Every time, Natalie documented date, time, names, and what was moved. One evening near sunset, as soft gold light brushed the fence posts and children's voices drifted from the cul-de-sac, Karen rolled up in her golf cart and stopped at the edge of the gravel. "Natalie, we're trying to be reasonable," she called, clipboard in her lap. "Meet us halfway." Natalie had a stack of books in her arms, dust on her jeans, and Owen's old screwdriver in her back pocket. She set a chapter book on the top shelf, shut the clear door, and answered without heat. "Halfway between mine and mine is still mine." Karen gave a small, disbelieving laugh, like someone hearing a language she refused to learn. "That attitude is going to make this harder than it needs to be." Natalie rested her hand on the cedar roof she had cut and sealed herself, on the box built from porch scraps and memory, on the corner of land June had defended and Owen had tended, and she said, "Hard is not new." Karen kept her smile in place for 2 full seconds after Natalie said it. Then the smile slipped at one corner. She sat in the golf cart with her knees angled together, visor brims sharp against the low sun, pearls resting like punctuation marks at her collarbone, and tapped her clipboard twice with a glossy fingernail as if she were closing a meeting. "We'll proceed formally," she said. "You'll receive the next notice Monday." Natalie nodded once and reached for another book from the stack, a weathered copy of Charlotte's Web with a child's name written in purple marker on the inside cover. "Drive safe," she said. Karen stared at her for a beat, waiting for argument she could swat down in public. When it didn't come, she pressed the accelerator harder than she needed to, and the golf cart bounced off the gravel onto the street with a little skid that made her sunglasses tilt. She corrected quickly, lifted her chin, and rolled off toward the entrance island like a parade marshal returning to formation. Natalie watched until the cart disappeared behind the new magnolias, then set Charlotte's Web on the middle shelf and straightened the row with her fingertips. The evening smelled like warm cedar and fresh-cut sod from the lots uphill. She could hear 2 kids laughing near the mailbox cluster and a sprinkler clicking in steady arcs. On ordinary nights, those sounds settled her. Tonight, they sharpened her focus. By Monday at 9:06 a.m., the notice arrived exactly as promised, hand-delivered in a white HOA envelope tucked into her screen door frame. The paper was thicker this time, and the language had hardened. Non-compliant structure. Unapproved public access point. Weekly penalty. $100 beginning immediately. Natalie stood at the kitchen counter reading it, while coffee reheated in the microwave, and rain ticked lightly against the window. Karen had signed in blue ink with a wide, looping flourish that tried to make authority look elegant. Natalie did what she always did. She wrote the date and time in the spiral notebook, photographed the letter next to the envelope and house number, and filed both in a manila folder labeled WPS-HOA. Then she printed one page from County GIS showing her lot line, another from assessor records showing no annexation into HOA jurisdiction, and clipped them behind the notice. She didn't send a response yet. She wanted a full stack, not an argument by installment. Karen, on the other hand, preferred installment warfare. 2 days later, she returned in person at 6:42 p.m., this time with a board member named Denise Porter riding shotgun in the cart and holding a phone up in recording mode before the wheels fully stopped. Karen wore the same visor, same pearls, different sunglasses with mirrored lenses that reflected Natalie's porch like surveillance footage. "We're documenting refusal to comply," Karen announced from the gravel. "For the record, the homeowner has declined all cooperative remedies." Natalie was on the porch in work boots, sanding a loose rail cap. She shut off the sander, set it down, and brushed dust from her palms. "For the record," she said, "you're standing on private property without permission." Denise lowered the phone halfway. Karen leaned forward, one hand on the wheel. "This frontage is functionally integrated with community entrance design." Functionally integrated is not a parcel designation. Karen gave a short laugh. That is exactly the kind of semantic game that ruins neighborhoods. Natalie looked past her at the cart badge swinging under the windshield. "No, ma'am. Ignoring maps ruins neighborhoods." Denise glanced sideways at Karen. And that glance paid off 3 meetings later when Denise stopped volunteering for these visits altogether. At the time, Karen missed it. She was too busy performing control, too busy narrating into Denise's phone like she was producing evidence for a trial she had already won. "Note homeowner's hostile posture," she said. Natalie had both hands loose at her sides and her voice low. "You came to my porch with a camera and a fine schedule." Karen's jaw tightened, face brightening pink under the visor. "You are not exempt from standards because of your personal story." That line landed heavy in the humid air. Karen knew about Owen because someone had told her, maybe a neighbor, maybe one of those friendly intake chats at board welcome events. She used the information like leverage anyway. Natalie felt the old medic calm settle over her, the one that narrowed the world to useful motions. She bent, picked up the sander, and carried it inside without another word. Physical action as answer. Karen called after her about escalating penalties. Natalie let the screen door close. 3 days passed before the certified letter came from HOA Council, stamped urgent and signed by a firm 40 miles away. It demanded immediate removal of the library and payment of accrued fines, citing governing instruments and architectural authority over entrance corridor frontage. Natalie read every line at the county office during lunch, then walked downstairs to archives instead of the break room. If Karen wanted formal, Natalie would go formal all the way down to the foundation bolts. The archive room was cool and smelled like old paper and copier toner. Metal shelves held plat books in labeled rows by year and subdivision phase. Natalie signed the pull sheet, requested Willow Pine Shores development file, and carried 2 heavy binders to the microfilm table. She wasn't searching for a miracle. She was searching for what people missed when they relied on assumptions. She found it on page 47 of a 2019 planning packet, clipped behind a traffic mitigation memo and buried under utility easement exhibits. Public Literacy Amenity Covenant. Recorded condition for density bonus approval. Tied to the northeast entrance frontage parcel, identified by meets and bounds that matched her corner strip. Continuous public access book exchange structure to be maintained as community benefit. Responsible parcel holder, Walsh, Natalie R., by separate access and maintenance agreement. The city had approved Phase 2 partly because that amenity existed and remained accessible from the sidewalk approach. Karen had been threatening the one feature her own subdivision permit package depended on. Natalie sat back in the metal chair and let out a breath that was almost a laugh. It wasn't triumph yet. It was recognition. Karen had not just overreached. She had built her own trap and invited witnesses. Natalie copied the covenant, certified the pull, and added it to her folder. Before she left, she requested one more file: Second Gate Emergency Egress License. That file mattered too, maybe even more. By the first week of November, the pattern had become public theater. Karen posted violation totals on the HOA resident portal with Natalie's street number bolded. She sent final opportunity emails copied to board members and, by mistake once, to a neighborhood realtor who wasn't on the board at all. On Saturday mornings, she parked the golf cart near the entrance, visor brim high, clipboard balanced on her knee, and intercepted walkers with lines about protecting property values from unmanaged public use. She talked fast, certain, and loud enough to win by momentum. What she did not do was verify one boundary map. At 8:15 on a windy Tuesday, Natalie came home to find yellow tape reading "Residents Only" stretched across the little library door, and 2 cardboard boxes of donated books set on the ground, damp from sprinkler mist. A maintenance crew truck idled near the curb. One worker, a young man in a neon shirt, held a staple gun and looked miserable. "Morning," Natalie said, calm as ever. "Who told you to do this?" He pointed with his chin toward the entrance where Karen's cart sat under the crepe myrtles. "Board directive, ma'am. We were told this is HOA asset now. Temporary closure." Natalie crouched, lifted the top box, and saw water spotting across a stack of children's paperbacks. She set the box on her porch where it was dry, then took out her phone and filmed the tape, the truck logo, the time on her watch, and the wet books. "Please don't staple anything else," she told the worker. "You personally are not in trouble." But this instruction was unauthorized. Karen was already marching over, pearls bouncing with each step. "Do not interfere with maintenance operations," she called. "You have no right to remove posted controls." Natalie held up one palm. "I'm documenting conditions on my property. You are obstructing community safety measures. Show me the city order. This is an HOA action. Then it's the wrong action." Karen's face went red like a tomato left too long in the sun. "Call dispatch." She snapped to no one in particular. And Denise, back for one last volunteer morning, actually did. She dialed non-emergency with shaky fingers while looking anywhere except Natalie. Deputy Mercer arrived 9 minutes later in the same unit as before, shoulders tense in that familiar mix of caution and annoyance. He took one look at the tape, one look at the boxes, and asked the question he should have asked from the beginning. Who authorized physical alteration on disputed frontage? Karen stepped in first. The board, under emergency nuisance authority. Mercer turned to Natalie. Ms. Walsh? Natalie handed him a clear folder tab with copies of assessor map and the newly certified covenant. No emergency declared by city, she said. No nuisance citation. Books were removed without consent. Please include that in your incident notes. He read the covenant once, frowned, and read it again. Public literacy amenity? He said quietly. Karen cut in. That document is being misrepresented. Mercer looked at her. Is it filed with the city? Karen hesitated half a beat. That's not the point. It is if you're taping off public access conditions tied to permits. For the first time since this started, Karen didn't have a ready sentence. She recovered with volume instead. She is undermining board governance. Natalie lifted the yellow tape from the library door and handed it to Mercer like evidence. I'd like this logged. He took it, nodded, and signaled the maintenance workers to stand down. They backed away from the box immediately, relief plain on both faces. Karen opened her clipboard, closed it, opened it again. Her authority depended on motion. Stillness exposed it. By Thursday afternoon, she escalated to a formal special board vote, held in the clubhouse and announced as reclassification of entrance corner to common operations strip. Natalie attended, sat in the second row, and listened while Karen read from a prepared statement about harmonization, risk management, and unauthorized public congregation. She spoke like a person declaring weather. The board, mostly tired homeowners with full-time jobs, looked uncertain but followed her lead until Natalie stood and requested the floor for exactly 60 seconds. She did not argue feelings. She handed the secretary 3 certified copies, parcel map, covenant, and a draft notice of permit breach implications if public access were obstructed. You can vote on your own property, she said. You cannot vote mine into yours. And if this board orders closure again, I will file with zoning and request fee recovery. Silence held for a long second. Then Denise said quietly, but clear, maybe we should ask city planning before any vote. Another board member nodded. Karen tried to push through anyway, but the motion died for lack of second. That night, at 10:18, dispatch called Natalie back about the taped library incident and gave her an event number. External contact, logged and active. She wrote it in the notebook, clipped the call summary to her folder, and set the binder by the front door. By dawn the next morning, Karen had posted one more message on the resident portal accusing Natalie of threatening board volunteers and warning that enforcement would continue. Natalie read it on her phone while standing on the porch in gray light, coffee warming her hand, and listened to the soft scrape of pages as a middle school kid in a backpack opened the library door, picked a mystery novel, and smiled to himself before heading to the bus stop. Natalie watched him go, then opened the binder to the Covenant tab and turned one page deeper to the emergency egress license she had certified in archives. The one Karen still hadn't realized existed. She held that certified egress license between 2 fingers for a moment, then laid it flat on the porch table beside the Covenant copy and smoothed both pages with her palm. The language was plain enough to fit on half a sheet. Revocable access license. Emergency lane crossing lot A-3. conditional on non-interference with recorded frontage amenity. Signed by her, countersigned by the developer, stamped by the city clerk in 2019. Karen had spent a year calling that lane our back gate route at board meetings, and she had never once checked who had granted it. At 6:38 a.m., the first vendor van turned into Willow Pine Shores and slowed near Natalie's corner, white paint flashing pink in early light. Two men climbed out and unloaded folding tables, linen bundles, and plastic crates labeled stemless flutes. A florist truck followed with white hydrangeas in buckets. Then came a golf cart caravan, volunteers in matching HOA polo shirts, and finally, Karen herself. Visor sharp as a blade, pearls centered, clipboard already open as if she were calling roll on a parade ground. Natalie stepped off her porch with the binder under one arm. "Morning," she said. "You're early for trespassing." Karen did not look up from her checklist. "Set the arch at the sidewalk seam. Keep the lane clear. We have catering in 20 minutes. Then she lifted her face toward Natalie and smiled for the volunteers. "You were notified. This is a private board function on community operations frontage." "Private," Natalie said. "On a public access covenant parcel. That's a neat trick." Karen's smile thinned. "Do not obstruct setup." Two volunteers moved toward the little library post with a socket wrench and a pry bar. One was Denise's husband, Carl, who worked nights at the plant and looked like he wanted to evaporate on the spot. "Ms. Walsh," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. Karen said this was approved relocation to storage. Natalie set the binder on her porch step and took out her phone. "Carl, I know you're following instructions. Film this with me so no one says you acted alone." Karen snapped, "Put that phone down. You are interfering with community property operations." Natalie kept recording. "State your full name and authority to remove that structure." Karen squared her shoulders to the growing audience at windows and driveways. Karen Elise Langford, HOA President, acting under board vote and council directive. "Good," Natalie said. "Keep talking." What happened next was the ugliest thing Karen had done yet, not because it was loud, but because it was deliberate. She waved two volunteers forward, and they wrapped yellow residents-only tape from mailbox post to library roof to porch corner, boxing off the strip like a staged exhibit. A third volunteer began unbolting the cedar box from its post, while the florist set hydrangeas where kids usually stood to trade books. One crate of donated paperbacks tipped over in the shuffle and spilled into damp grass. Karen watched it happen and kept giving instructions about champagne placement. A middle school girl on a scooter coasted up, backpack straps bouncing, saw the tape, and stopped short. "Is it closed?" she asked. Karen answered before Natalie could. "Residents only this morning, sweetheart." The girl looked at Natalie, then at the books in the grass, then pushed off silently and rode toward the bus stop with her shoulders drawn tight. Natalie felt that in her ribs like a dull strike. The box had been built for that exact hour, that exact kid, that exact ordinary exchange, and Karen had turned it into set dressing for a brunch. Natalie dialed non-emergency with her left hand while still filming. "This is Natalie Walsh at 114 Cedar Rise. Active property dispute, unauthorized removal in progress. Prior event number attached." She gave dispatch the old number from her notebook and asked for the same responding deputy if available. External contact, documented and connected. Karen stepped into frame on purpose, voice rising. "Tell them she is threatening volunteers and obstructing lawful operations." Natalie did not move. "Tell them you're dismantling a recorded permit condition." By 7:04 a.m., patrol lights appeared at the entrance. Deputy Mercer got out first, with the same careful posture he had worn the previous week. And another deputy she didn't know followed with a notepad. Mercer took in the tape, the tables, the half-unbolted library box, the spilled books, and his expression flattened into professional disbelief. "Everybody pause," he said. "Hands off the structure until we sort this out." Karen marched over, red rising in her cheeks. "Deputy, thank you. She is interfering with community property operations. We have legal notices, board authority, and scheduled vendor contracts. We need her removed from this frontage now." Mercer looked at Natalie. She stood by her porch step, phone still recording, hair clipped back, robe over work jeans, calm as fence wire. "Ms. Walsh? She's calling my yard common property again," Natalie said. And she ordered removal. Karen cut in. "Because it is common frontage under HOA control." Mercer lifted one hand. "One at a time." The second deputy began collecting names from volunteers. Carl gave his statement softly and handed over the wrench without being asked. The florist backed away from the hydrangeas. A catering driver killed his engine and stared straight ahead, like he was waiting out a storm. Then Karen made the mistake that turned bad conduct into a documented peak. She pointed at Natalie and said, "Loud enough for everyone within 2 lots. If she won't move, arrest her for trespass. This board has tolerated her defiance long enough." Mercer's jaw tightened. He did not touch his cuffs. "Ma'am, I'm not arresting a homeowner until I verify records. That is HOA common property. That is a claim," he said, "not verification." The scene snapped into the exact shape it would hold in memory. Blue lights across wet gravel. Karen performing certainty with her clipboard like a warrant, volunteers frozen mid-setup, and Natalie on her own porch being told to step off her own corner. The same line Mercer had used earlier came again, now formal and careful. "Ma'am, I need you to step off HOA common property right now while we sort this complaint." Natalie sat down in her cedar rocker, set her phone beside her mug, and answered in the tone she used for chart entries and permit notes. "I'm staying where I am." Karen spread her papers toward Mercer like cards in a magic act. "She refuses lawful directives. She has no right to impede this operation." Natalie watched Mercer's eyes flick to the half-removed bolts and the tape. Then she stood, walked inside without hurry, and came back with the slim county binder she had opened at dawn. She held it out, not dramatic, just precise. "Deputy," she said, "you might want to check these before anyone touches another screw." Mercer took the binder and flipped to the flag tabs. First document, Public Literacy Amenity Covenant. Parcel match and recording stamp clear. Continuous public access book exchange required as permit condition. Second document, Revocable Emergency Egress Lane License. Crossing her land behind the hedge granted to HOA use only while the board complied with non-interference language tied to that same amenity parcel. Mercer read in silence, then read the license paragraph again. The second deputy leaned in over his shoulder. Karen laughed once, brittle. She is misreading old paperwork. Mercer looked up at Karen. "Mrs. Langford, your board's second gate approval relies on this lane license." Karen blinked behind her sunglasses. "No, the lane is ours." "No, ma'am." He tapped the signature block with his pen. "It is hers. License to HOA, revocable." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "That can't be right." Natalie spoke from the porch rail. "It is right. And your cease and desist ordered me to stop the one thing your permit requires me to maintain." Karen's face drained from red to chalky pale in one visible sweep. She reached for the binder, then stopped when Mercer angled it away. "We have counsel," she said, but the force was gone from it. "Then counsel can meet with city zoning," Mercer replied. "Right now, nobody removes this library, and all setup comes down." He directed volunteers to remove the tape and return the books to dry shelves. Carl did it first, careful with each paperback, and 2 others followed. The florist loaded hydrangeas back into her truck without a word. The catering van pulled out empty. Karen stood still in the gravel, while her brunch dissolved around her, clipboard hanging at her side like a broken wing. Before he left, Mercer logged the tape as evidence, attached Natalie's prior event number to the new incident, and noted attempted removal of a permit-conditioned amenity on disputed property. External contact resolved into a report chain. Physical evidence submitted, tagged, and referenced. City zoning called by noon. Officer Lena Ruiz arrived in a gray sedan, reviewed both documents on site, and photographed the corner strip, lane hedge, and library post. "Ms. Walsh," she said, "you are in compliance. HOA enforcement here is outside their jurisdiction and contrary to filed conditions." She turned to Karen. "Any continued interference triggers municipal violation review." Karen tried one last assertion about beautification authority. Ruiz answered with one sentence. "Beautification does not override recorded covenants or private parcel ownership." 3 days later, City Council heard the matter on the regular Tuesday docket, 6 p.m., chambers half full and unusually quiet. Natalie sat in the second row with her binder. Karen sat at the aisle with HOA counsel and did not wear pearls. The clerk entered the covenant, license, incident reports, portal screenshots, fine notices, and body cam references into record. Distinctive details that had seemed petty in isolation lined up into a clean pattern once sworn and time-stamped. Council voted to void HOA fines against Natalie, ordered municipal sanctions for improper enforcement actions, and directed corrective notice to all residents clarifying that the little library parcel remained private land subject to public access covenant, not HOA common area. They also affirmed that repeated interference gave Natalie legal grounds to suspend lane access pending compliance terms. Karen was censured by her own board the following week and removed as president by a 4-1 vote. Denise seconded the motion, voice steady. The board sent Natalie a written apology and asked to negotiate a new lane use agreement. Natalie agreed, businesslike, with conditions. Annual fee, insurance certificate, and explicit non-interference with the library in any form. They signed. At sunset that Friday, Natalie restocked the rebuilt shelves with children's mysteries, large print westerns, and 2 new grief memoirs. The cedar smelled fresh where bolts had been retightened. A boy with a skateboard took a science book and said thank you without being prompted. Across the street, sprinklers clicked on, then off. Natalie sat back in the rocker with her plain white mug and watched kids read at the corner where Karen had tried to erase them. The lane behind the hedge opened by her permission, and the porch quiet again for the first time in months. The next Monday at 8:02 a.m., Natalie stood at the county clerk's side window while a ceiling fan clicked overhead and pushed cool air that smelled faintly of toner and old folders. Clerk Ramirez slid a release envelope under the glass and tapped the evidence line with her pen. "Incident supplement is finalized," she said. Deputy Mercer tagged the yellow tape and returned it for civil filing. "Chain is closed." Natalie opened the envelope, checked the tag number against her notebook, and nodded once. The strip that had read, "Residents Only," was folded into a clear bag. No longer a prop, now a record. Outside, the second gate at Willow Pine Shores sat open and useless. Orange cones funneled across the lane behind the hedge, and a temporary city sign read, "Emergency egress access suspended, pending compliance." The notice had gone live at 7 a.m., exactly 72 hours after Natalie's revocation letter was hand-delivered and emailed to HOA Council, City Zoning, and Fire Review. Cars that usually cut through the lane idled in a neat line on the main road, then turned toward the north exit instead. No shouting, no chaos, just a longer drive, and the quiet arithmetic of dependence made visible. Deputy Mercer stood near the cones with a clipboard of his own now, directing vendors toward the alternate route. He saw Natalie at the curb and gave a small lift of his chin. "Morning, Miss Walsh. Fire Marshal acknowledged your notice at 6:41. They're calling this administrative, not emergency." "Thank you for closing the loop," she said. He held up a stapled packet. "Dispatch also attached the non-emergency recordings and your event numbers into one file. Nothing pending on our side unless there's new contact." Karen Langford stepped out of a white SUV 10 yards away, sunglasses on, though the sun was still low, hair fixed stiff against the breeze. She took 3 quick steps toward Natalie, then stopped when Mercer shifted his stance between them. "You cannot block neighborhood access," Karen said, voice sharp but thinner than it used to be. "You are punishing families." Natalie kept her hands at her sides. "I suspended a revocable license after repeated interference, exactly as the signed terms allow." Karen's mouth tightened. "This is retaliation." Mercer answered before Natalie did. "Mrs. Langford, City Zoning affirmed the suspension authority Friday. You also have a no-entry notice for Ms. Walsh's lot. Keep distance and direct concerns through council." Karen looked past him like she might force the old script back into place by volume alone, then saw 2 residents watching from their cars and thought better of it. "This is not over," she said. But there was no audience left for the line. She turned, got back into the SUV, and drove toward the north exit with everyone else. At 10:17 a.m., the HOA board sat around the clubhouse conference table under humming fluorescent lights. Denise Porter now occupied the president's seat, shoulders squared, no visor, no theatrics, just a legal pad and a tired expression. HOA counsel, a gray-suited man named Felton, arranged marked exhibits in tidy stacks. Natalie sat opposite them with Mr. Harden, whose scratchy voice always sounded like it came through dry leaves, even indoors. On the wall monitor, the draft agreement title read, "Lane Access License Reinstatement and Non-Interference Covenant Compliance." Denise cleared her throat. "For the record, board censure of former President Langford was entered Wednesday, and removal vote carried 4-1 Thursday evening. We're here to restore compliant access and resolve damages." Natalie opened her folder and slid 3 invoices across the table. Library repair labor and hardware, $612. Water damaged and removed books, $184. Filing fees and service costs, $492. Legal fees are itemized in Mr. Harden's letter. Felton scanned the pages. Total fee petition is $12,600. Mr. Harden folded his hands. That figure excludes future monitoring. It is restrained given the record. Denise nodded without argument. Board will pay damages and filing costs within 10 business days. Legal fee portion, we request 30 days. Natalie looked at her and then at the monitor. 30 days is acceptable if the correction notice posts today and remains pinned for 90. Denise wrote it down. Done. Felton highlighted the next clause. Annual lane license. Previously $0 courtesy. Proposed now at $9,000 per year. Payable quarterly. A board member at the far end exhaled softly through his nose, not in protest, more in recognition of what free had cost them. Denise said, "We accept $9,000. We also accept insurance certificate requirements and quarterly compliance checks. Natalie pointed to Clause 8. And explicit language. No board member, contractor, volunteer, or resident acting under board instruction may touch, tape, relocate, obstruct, or relabel the Little Free Library structure or parcel. Violation triggers automatic suspension. Felton glanced at Denise. Denise answered herself. Accepted. Mr. Harden added one more page. Mutual Communication Protocol. Any complaint concerning the frontage goes first to City Zoning Liaison in writing. No direct enforcement, no doorstep confrontation. Accepted, Denise said again, this time faster, as if she wanted the old pattern buried before someone revived it. At 11:03 a.m., they signed. Natalie's signature went down first on the reinstatement page, then Denise's, then Felton's witness line, then Mr. Harden's. The board treasurer cut a cashier's check on site for the non-legal damages and handed it across with both hands. Natalie placed it in her folder without ceremony. As chairs scraped back, Carl Porter lingered by the doorway, cap in his hands. Ms. Walsh, he said quietly, I sent an email statement to zoning Friday about who gave the removal order and what tools we used. I should have spoken up sooner. Natalie met his eyes. You did speak up. It counted. Denise looked between them and added, for what it's worth, that statement helped stop two people from minimizing what happened. By 1:26 p.m., Natalie stood in Court Clerk Room B, while Mr. Harden filed her injunction and fee recovery petition as stipulated, then marked it held in abeyance pending payment and compliance. If they breach, this goes active same day, he said, tapping the docket number. No fresh drama required. She gave a small nod. Paper is enough. Before she left the building, her phone buzzed with two notifications. The first was from City Council records. Certified order posted, sanctions invoice to HOA, fine ledger attached. The second was from the HOA resident portal. Now under Denise's name, headline in plain text, Prior enforcement actions against lot, a -3 void. Board acknowledges jurisdictional error. Non-resident access to library remains per city covenant. Natalie read it once, saved a screenshot, and filed it to the same folder where Karen's old notices sat. Every paper that had come for her now had an answer clipped behind it. That evening, at 6:44, the cones were gone from the hedge lane. A small city placard remained on the post for one day as a procedural closeout marker, then would be removed. The lane was open again by her permission, under her terms, with signatures that meant what they said. On Wednesday, just after sunset, the porch light came on by timer and painted a warm square across the cedar boards, while Natalie sorted books into new stacks on the rocker side table. The rebuilt library door swung clean on its hinges, no tape, no stickers, just the hand-painted sign she had started with. Children's mysteries on the middle shelf, large print westerns below. Grief memoirs to the right, where adults tended to look last and need most. The two damp boxes from that brunch morning were long dry now. She had wiped each cover over the weekend and kept 12 titles that could be saved. The warped ones she noted as abandoned in her notebook, then donated the unreadable paper to a school art bin the way the librarian suggested. A pickup slowed at the curb. The man who used to stand by his truck with a travel mug stepped out, awkward, jacket off for once. Name's Rick Danner, he said. I was the guy pretending to check a tire that first morning. Natalie gave him a polite half-smile. You weren't subtle. He laughed once, embarrassed. No, ma'am. I never came over then. Figured it wasn't my business. But I did send my dash cam clip to Denise after the tape incident. Shows the volunteers unbolting before officers arrived. Thought you should know. "I appreciate that," she said. "And for what it's worth, plenty of folks watched and said nothing. That part never surprises." He nodded, hands in pockets, then glanced at the shelves. "My mom's low vision. You mind if I take one of those westerns?" "Take two." He did, and left a hardcover mystery in trade. At 7:03, Deputy Mercer walked up the drive out of uniform, carrying a paperback in one hand and a slim envelope in the other. "Off duty," he said, almost apologetic. "My aunt finished this and asked me to drop it." He held out the envelope. Also, final incident closure memo. No further law enforcement action. Civil side complete. Natalie opened it, scanned the last line, and tucked it into the binder pocket where the event numbers lived. "Thank you for doing your job clean." He shifted his weight, then nodded toward the parcel marker stake by the fence, white with a black cap catching the porch light. "You were right about running the old file first." She followed his gaze. Old files keep people honest. He left with a nod and no speech. By the second week of December, the rhythm at the corner had settled into what Natalie had wanted all along. Ordinary use. No theater. A middle school girl on a scooter came by at 7:15 each weekday, and always checked the top shelf first. The retired lineman returned bird guides with penciled notes on migration dates. A night shift nurse swapped thrillers before dawn. Denise herself stopped one afternoon, no entourage, and left a stack of children's paperbacks with library pockets still inside. She did not ask for absolution. She asked where donations should go and followed the answer. Karen passed twice in her SUV during those days and did not stop. The no-entry notice remained on file, served and acknowledged. She kept her distance from Lot A3 and from the library corner she had once called common property. The golf cart with the laminated badge disappeared from morning patrols, then from the clubhouse lot entirely. People talked, because neighborhoods always do. But the talk had changed register. Less rumor, more record. On a cold, clear evening, Natalie sat back in the cedar rocker with her plain white mug, watched the sky fade from brass to blue over the hedge lane, and listened to pages turn under the library's little roof as two kids stood shoulder to shoulder choosing books. Sprinklers hissed at the entrance island and clicked off in their programmed sequence, same as that first morning. But now the sound blended into quiet instead of argument. The lane behind the hedge stayed open because she allowed it. The box at the corner stayed open because she built it. The porch stayed hers because it always had been. She rocked once, then again, cedar whispering against cedar, and let the subdivision finally be still.